She was writing her own eulogy, not because the doctors told her to, but because she didn't think she had time left. Evelyn Coles, 50 years old, mother, widow, fighter. That morning, a doctor looked her in the eyes and said 2 words, stage 2.
The results are back. It's serious. We'll discuss treatment.
She drove home like nothing happened. Same streets, same people, same world. But everything had changed, and then she saw him, a man sitting on the street, watching her like he already knew her. She ignored him. The next time, she didn't. What she didn't know, what none of us ever know, is that sometimes the person sent to save you isn't wearing a white coat. Sometimes they're sitting outside in the cold, holding a cardboard sign, wearing a man's name you used to know. This is the story of Evelyn Coles, a diagnosis, and a stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all.
The oncologist's name was Dr. Patricia Osei, and she had kind eyes that Evelyn immediately distrusted. The kind of eyes that had practiced delivering devastation. Stage 2 breast cancer, left side. Caught it late enough to matter, early enough to fight. Those were Dr. Osei's exact words, and Evelyn had nodded like she was receiving a grocery list. She drove home from Grady Memorial on a Thursday, through the slow amber of Atlanta's rush hour, past the barbershop on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, where her late husband Darnell used to get his lineup every other Saturday. She passed the elementary school her daughters attended, the old church her mother cleaned on weekends for 43 years. The city looked exactly the same. That was the cruelest part. The way the world refused to acknowledge what had just happened to her. Evelyn was not a woman who leaned into crisis. She was the woman you called when the crisis came to you. When her husband, Darnell, died of a stroke 8 years ago at 44, she had organized the repast, managed the estate, kept her daughters, Camille, 17, and Joy, 12, steady through a grief that could have hollowed them all out. She cooked, she planned, she handled. It was her nature and her armor. But that night, alone in her kitchen, she opened her laptop and typed the words, "What does it feel like when cancer wins?" She stared at the search bar for a long moment, then closed the laptop without hitting enter. She wouldn't tell her daughters yet. She needed a week, just 1 week, to decide who she was going to be inside this thing before she let it change who she was to everyone else. The next morning, she opened the catering business anyway. She made her signature honey-glazed chicken and collard greens for a retirement luncheon in Buckhead. She smiled at every person who complimented the food. She drove home with tips in her jacket pocket and a biopsy appointment reminder on her phone, and the terrifying, ordinary rhythm of a life that hadn't stopped for her at all. It was on the drive home that she first saw him. A man sitting against the concrete wall of the parking garage on Lee Street, his knees pulled up, a cardboard sign in his lap. She didn't stop, but her eyes snagged on something about him. Something she couldn't name and wouldn't remember until much, much later. Evelyn's older daughter Camille was 25 now, living across town in a rented room in East Atlanta, working 2 jobs and studying for her nursing boards. She was her mother's daughter in almost every way, pragmatic, proud, with a gift for making hard things look effortless. But unlike Evelyn, Camille had inherited her father's softness underneath. She cried at commercials. She kept every birthday card anyone had ever given her in a shoebox under her bed. She came to visit on a Sunday, the tradition held since Darnell's death, and brought pastries from the Haitian bakery on Flat Shoals Avenue. She sat at the same kitchen table where Evelyn would later write her eulogy, and she watched her mother move through the kitchen the way a person watches a river, beautiful, powerful, apparently endless. But Camille noticed small things. The way her mother had stopped humming while she cooked. The way she refilled her coffee mug and then forgot to drink it. The thin scar forming at the corner of Evelyn's mouth from biting it. Something Camille had only ever seen her do when her father was sick and her mother didn't know anyone was looking. She didn't ask. Because she also knew her mother well enough to understand that Evelyn Coles only told you something when she was ready to hold the weight of your reaction on top of whatever she was already carrying. Instead, Camille stayed late. She did the dishes. She sat on the couch and watched an old Tyler Perry movie with her mother until Evelyn fell asleep, and then Camille covered her with the quilt from the back of the armchair, the one Darnell's mother had sewn, and went looking in the kitchen for a pen to leave a note. She found the legal pad, the one with the first 3 lines of a eulogy in her mother's handwriting. She read it once, folded it back exactly as she'd found it, left her note on the counter, leftover pastries in the fridge, "I love you, Mama," and walked to her car in the dark and sat there for 40 minutes, both hands on the steering wheel, before she could make herself drive away. She didn't call. She didn't come back early. She did something else instead, something her mother would only find out about weeks later, from the last person either of them expected. His name was Roosevelt. Roosevelt James Coles. And yes, that was the same last name, though Evelyn wouldn't register it the first 3 times she drove past him. She had stopped thinking about surnames the way people stop thinking about breathing. You only notice it when something interrupts the rhythm. He had been sleeping in the parking garage on Lee Street for 6 weeks by the time Evelyn first stopped. It happened on a Wednesday, 3 days after she'd received her surgery date. She had a container of leftover baked macaroni in her passenger seat. She always made too much. And something in her, the part that still believed feeding people was the same as loving them, made her pull over. He was a tall man, maybe 60, with a silver-streaked beard and hands that had once been strong in the way working hands are strong. He smelled of cold air and something else beneath it, cedar, faint as a memory. He accepted the food quietly, thanked her with a formality that caught her off guard, like a man who had once known protocol and hadn't forgotten it, even now. "You from Atlanta?" she asked, because she didn't know what else to say, and her mouth moved before her caution did. "Originally Memphis," he said. "Moved here years ago. Then things shifted." She nodded. Things shift. She understood that. She came back the next Wednesday with another container, and the Wednesday after that. They talked about the weather, about the neighborhood, about the way the West End had changed. She told him she ran a catering business. He told her he'd once been a contractor, built things for other people to live in, until the business went under in 2009 and took everything with it. On the 4th Wednesday, he said something that stopped her cold. "You're not sleeping, are you?" he said. Not accusatory, just certain, the way some people can read weather in a sky that still looks clear. She stared at him. "Why would you say that?" "Because you've been bringing me food every week," he said, "and the portions keep getting larger. People who are at peace don't cook like they're trying to empty themselves out." She went home that night and cried for the first time since the diagnosis. Not the quiet, managed crying she'd allowed herself in the car outside Grady. Real crying. The kind that rearranges something inside you. And she couldn't explain why a stranger on the street had been the one to finally crack her open, until she found out he wasn't a stranger at all. Camille had hired a private search firm 2 weeks before Evelyn ever stopped that car. She had been looking for her father's younger brother, Darnell's estranged brother Roosevelt, who had gone missing from the family's lives years before Darnell ever got sick. She had found him.
She just hadn't told her mother yet, because she didn't know how.
The truth came out on a Sunday, the way most truths in that family did. Camille had finally called her mother the night before and said, "I need to tell you something about Roosevelt James Coles." And Evelyn had gone very still on the phone, because she had learned the man's full name by then, had asked him 3 Wednesdays in, and the last name had registered somewhere low and quiet in her chest. But she had told herself it was coincidence, that Coles was not a rare name, that the world was not that particular. But the world was exactly that particular. Darnell had a younger brother he'd cut off in 2003, after a falling out over money and old family wounds that never fully healed. He'd never spoken about it to Evelyn directly, just said once that he had a brother he'd failed, and that it was the thing he'd carry the longest. She had understood it to be guilt. She hadn't known the man's face. Camille came over that Sunday morning with a file folder of documents and a look on her face like someone carrying glass. She explained the search. She showed her mother the records. She said, voice steady but hands not, "Mama, the man you've been feeding, that's Daddy's brother." Evelyn sat with that for a long time, long enough that Camille reached across the table and covered her mother's hands with her own. Then Evelyn said, "He looks like Darnell around the eyes. I thought I was grieving." She had been. She just hadn't known she was grieving for 2 men at once. They drove to Lee Street together that afternoon. Roosevelt was there. He saw them coming, saw Camille, and then looked at Evelyn. And something shifted across his face that was not surprise. It was something older than surprise. It was the look of a man who had been waiting for a reckoning he had stopped believing would come. "You knew," Evelyn said. "It wasn't an accusation. I knew your name the first day you stopped," he said.
I'm out here every day trying to
Darnell
get by.
talked about you in letters.
I need some help.
Even after
just
everything.
a little support.
He paused.
Anything you can give would mean the
I
world.
didn't know how to be someone you'd want
Thank
to
you
know.
for listening.
So I figured I'd just receive what you offered, until I figured it out. Camille was crying. Evelyn was not yet. "My husband loved you," Evelyn said. "He just didn't know how to say it across that much distance." Roosevelt looked down at the concrete for a moment. Then, "How is he?" The silence that followed was the heaviest thing any of them had ever held. She told him. And then she told him the other thing. The thing she hadn't yet told her youngest daughter, Joy, hadn't fully said out loud to anyone. She told him about the cancer. Not because she'd planned to, but because somewhere in the previous 4 weeks, this man had become someone she told the truth to. Roosevelt James Coles moved into Evelyn's spare bedroom 6 days later, after Camille and her younger sister Joy had thoroughly discussed it, argued about it, and ultimately arrived at the same place daughters arrive when their mother has made a decision: acceptance. He was quiet in the way of a man who had learned to take up as little space as possible, and Evelyn watched him slowly unlearn that. She watched him begin to occupy doorways again, to pour himself coffee without asking, to laugh, which turned out to sound heartbreakingly like Darnell. He came to every chemotherapy appointment. Not inside. He would wait in the plastic chairs of the waiting room with a paperback he never seemed to read, and when Evelyn came out he would stand and say nothing, and hand her the small bottle of ginger ale he always brought because she'd mentioned once, offhandedly, that it was the only thing that settled her stomach afterward. He cooked, badly and enthusiastically, on the nights when Evelyn was too tired. He cleaned the kitchen after, meticulously, the way a man does when he is trying to earn a place he knows he doesn't fully deserve yet. Joy, 19, studying pre-law at Spelman, sharp as a blade and twice as protective, thawed last. But she thawed. On a Saturday in February, she came home to find Roosevelt fixing the back porch screen that had been broken for 2 years, and she stood in the doorway watching him and then said, out of nowhere, "Daddy used to say he had a brother who built things." Roosevelt didn't turn around. He just said, "He built things too. He just built them out of different materials. Joy went inside and did not come back out for 20 minutes. When she did, she brought him a glass of sweet tea and sat on the steps without explanation. And they were quiet together in the way of two people who have just recognized something in each other. 3 weeks before Evelyn's final scan, the one that would determine whether the treatment had worked, Camille found, folded inside her mother's Bible, a letter. It was in Darnell's handwriting. Dated 2011, 3 years after his estrangement from Roosevelt, 2 years before his death. It was addressed to Roosevelt but never sent. In it, Darnell had written, "I've asked Evelyn to look for you after I'm gone, if you've ever come back around. She won't know to look yet, but I'll tell her. I just haven't found the right time." He had never found it. But somehow, across 8 years and a cardboard sign and a woman who cooked when she was afraid, the letter had delivered itself anyway. The final scan came back clean. Stage 2, caught and fought, and on the other side of it stood a family that hadn't existed 6 months before, remade by sickness and grief and the inexplicable grace of a Tuesday drive down Lee Street.
Sometimes the people we lose send us the people we need. Not in the ways we asked for, not in the shapes we'd recognize at first glance, but faithfully, across years and distance and silence that stretched too long. Evelyn didn't survive cancer because of medicine alone. She survived because she was too busy feeding someone else to believe she was allowed to give up. And in doing so, she fed herself back to life. Darnell Coles died before he could fix what was broken. But love, it turns out, does not require the living to finish what it starts. She still makes too much food every time she cooks. She says it's habit. Her family knows it's a prayer.